This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. The Evening Standard's Leader column today tells the story of a man in France who managed to blow up part of his house while trying to swat a fly. When he started, he never expected to leave the place in ruins, it says, nor of course did the Prime Minister when he campaigned for Brexit. Mr Johnson's critics fear the latest move in negotiations risks doing just that. The UK is reportedly planning to use new laws to override the Brexit Withdrawal Agreement, which could see trade talks collapse and the country could leave the European Union with no deal. Our associate editor Julian Glover is here. Julian, is this just brinkmanship?
Nobody knows quite what's going on. I imagine even the Prime Minister doesn't know where this cliffhanger is going to end up. What's really clear is that the European Union has put forward a plan and the British government doesn't like it. Now, the question is, does it not like it because it wants to be seen not to like it and have a huge row and in the end sign up? Remember, that is more or less what happened last year when we were told there wasn't going to be a deal and it was all a nightmare. And then Boris Johnson did get a few shifts out of the European Union. He wasn't completely copying Theresa May's deal, but in return for that, he accepted something she didn't want, which is a sort of invisible border in the Irish Sea. It's all very complex, not really of huge interest, except to people who live in Northern Ireland and in the south of Ireland, and to the rest of the country, in that this might be the sticking point. The government signed up to something it now doesn't like. There are sort of three things we're being told in the weekly thing we get now. We have a discussion before the talks where everybody briefs what they want, then goes quiet, and then we find out stuff at the end of the week. Well, we're in the sort of pre-bit. We heard last week state aid was one of the sticking points. Complete irony there, of course, because Britain wrote the European Union rules on state aid because we wanted free competition. We didn't want all of those pesky continentals bailing out their car factories and inefficient steelworks. We wanted good, rigorous, free market economics. European Union agreed to it, kind of thing we used to get our way in the European Union more than we ever realised. Now, of course, they're trying to stick to the rules we wrote and we don't like them, or at least Boris Johnson doesn't like them, or possibly Dominic Cummings doesn't like them because he is rather keen on all sorts of investments in big tech in the future, all sorts of government spending money on random projects which later flop. Anyway, state aid's one of them, fishing's another one, but in the end you can always get around fishing because it doesn't matter that much. And the final thing is Northern Ireland. Does this point to a big bust-up, or does it point to a lot of flag-waving and then suddenly a settlement? I think it's pointing more to a bust-up. I think the government's quite close to accepting that no deal is pretty much the same as a thin deal. A big deal isn't on the offing, and anyway, they can blame coronavirus for the economic catastrophe. Get it all over with. It's like doing all the horrible exams in 1 week, or having all your vaccines. Maybe we all want vaccines this day, but normally vaccines you don't like, go get all the jabs at once. Well, it could be like that. The government thinks just pile a no deal onto the coronavirus heap and see what happens. And in 4 years' time, the election will come and we'll have forgotten all about exactly what bit was blamed for each. So it's sort of pointing to no deal. I don't think Europe's going to shift a lot. We might shift a bit. Maybe there'll be a thin deal, a sort of stop the queues at Dover kind of deal, not a bigger one.
Now, you mentioned there that fishing's not a big deal, but up north in Scotland, where I'm from, I know that that's a huge issue, and they're going to be, the SNP is looking to get a majority in the Parliament, and they'll push for independence again, as Nicola Sturgeon has said. We know that Northern Ireland's not going to like it if there's a no deal and a hard border there. Doesn't this risk a split of the Union even more than before?
Everything that happens in the world is now seen by Nicola Sturgeon completely fairly, because that's what she wants, as evidence that Scotland needs to be independent. You never hear her say, gosh, something's just happened, and I think that weakens the case for independence. So, of course, fishing is a big thing. Peterhead and other places, it's a huge issue for some people. But in the scale of the UK's economic future, it's not a huge issue. In the southwest of England, it's a big issue as well. Some of the ports there, the former fishing ports and small fishing ports at the moment, it could affect seats in the election. But in the end, if Boris Johnson has to sell something down the river or sell it down the ocean, it would be fishing. He will go for fishing as something to sacrifice if he could get some big concession on something else. And anyway, everybody can sort of park the fishing thing. You could come to a deal which had a transition over many years. They could work a way through. In the end, if Brexit comes down to can we reach a deal on fishing or not, we will get a Brexit deal. The bigger question is aid, European Union right to insist on some kind of UK coherence to acceptable standards that applies to everyone else. We are being very difficult about that. There are reasons to be difficult. In the end, if you're going to have Brexit, make a full go of it, get all of those freedoms, but there will be costs, and the costs could be pretty painful. On top of a second wave of coronavirus this winter, confidence in the UK could fall further. Does the Prime Minister want that? In the end, as we say in the leader today, he's got to decide. Does he feel lucky?
We've got this mid-October deadline that Boris Johnson has given. Now, we also have rising cases of coronavirus. Could we be in a situation where coronavirus is on the rise and there's a no-deal Brexit on the horizon and Boris Johnson might find himself in some troubled waters there?
I think the only thing we know out of the history of the last 12 months is that everything we thought was wrong. That's mostly true of almost all political predictions, but it's particularly true now. If we'd been having this conversation this time last year, in fact, we were having this conversation this time last year, we would have been talking about, will there be a second referendum? Is the Lib Dems surge after that shock by-election win that took place less than a year ago now, I think, or about a year ago? Remember them, the Lib Dems? Everything turned out to be nonsense. There wasn't a second referendum. Boris Johnson got a big majority. We did have Brexit happen, and there was a sort of transition deal. Of course, none of us knew about coronavirus. Right now, we can say, perhaps a bit more accurately, that cases are going to go up, or at least detected infection rates are going to go up, because testing is now quite big. That isn't necessarily the same as saying full-blown people suffering from coronavirus, but the figures are going up, and they're going up fast in other bits of Europe, so that might well happen here. Beyond that, what are the consequences? We don't yet know. Of course, the government's got its trump card. Will it have a vaccine? Will that solve everything? Well, we don't know. They obviously hope it will. But right now, we can speculate. We can probe a bit into the future. But I bet if we replay this conversation in a year's time, everything we predict will be wrong. Sorry about that.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.